Have you ever wondered why so many intelligent, powerful and respected men fall to what seems like a simple impulse? Why do people with influence and status lose everything over desires that appear harmless? Leaders, CEOs, pastors, athletes, it doesn't matter how high they climb. Many collapse because they couldn't control something that starts small, a click, a glance, a text. It feels trivial, but it's a silent giant. Maybe lust isn't just a natural urge, maybe it's a subtle enemy that sneaks in during boredom, loneliness or power, an enemy that promises pleasure but delivers emptiness. Philosopher Augustine said, "The soul turns away from God when it seeks pleasure in created things rather than the Creator." Today, that misdirection is everywhere, disguised as freedom and self-expression. So is desire the real problem? Or is it what we do with it? Lust feels personal, internal, but what if it's part of something much bigger? What if your inner struggle isn't just yours? What if there's a system built to keep you distracted and weak? Stick with me. The answer to that question could change the way you see your mind, your body, and your soul. Desire is a natural part of being human. It drives us toward love, beauty, and connection. But there's a fine line between healthy desire and the kind that begins to take control. When pleasure turns into a constant need, it stops being freedom. You're no longer choosing, you're obeying, and the scary part? It happens slowly, without you even noticing. Science shows that when the brain is exposed to intense sexual stimuli over and over, it starts acting like it's addicted. Dopamine floods the reward system, and soon the brain needs more just to feel the same. A 2014 study in JAMA Psychiatry by Kuhn and Gallinat found that frequent pornography use is linked to reduced gray matter in brain regions responsible for motivation and decision-making. That means the more you give in, the less strength you have to resist. What was once pleasure becomes a compulsion, and what looked like freedom becomes a cage. This is where the real battle begins, because you're not fighting something outside of you. You're fighting something that's already taken root inside. Since ancient times, philosophers have reflected on the role of desire in shaping the human soul. To Plato, the soul was like a chariot pulled by two horses, one noble and disciplined, the other wild and impulsive. The wild horse represents desire. Without reason to guide it, the chariot loses direction. In this view, lust is the rebellion of appetite against purpose. St. Augustine also saw unrestrained sexual desire as a force that corrupts the will. The problem isn't the body, it's when the body takes command over the soul. Nietzsche didn't condemn desire, but warned, "He who cannot control his impulses is eventually devoured by them." For him, the strong man is one who can transform his raw drives into creativity. In other words, desire without reason becomes self-destruction. You stop thinking, you start reacting, and when that happens, the soul begins to collapse. Lust doesn't just weaken the body, it breaks down character. It clouds your judgment, strips away your purpose, and numbs your spirit. And the further you drift from your essence, the more vulnerable you become. We live in an age where the body has become a storefront. Social media, ads, music videos, they all present the human form not as someone to understand, but something to consume. Philosopher Guy Debord called this the society of the spectacle, a culture where appearance matters more than essence. And in this system, lust disguises itself as freedom. The objectification of bodies, especially of women, has become so normalized that we barely notice. But behind the habit is a machine that turns people into products and relationships into transactions. Neuroscientist John Twenger has shown how constant exposure to sexualized images affects self-worth, especially among young people. The result? Disconnected relationships, shallow emotions, and a generation unsure of what real intimacy feels like. When everything becomes stimulus, we lose the ability to feel deeply. The soul grows numb. The gaze, which should reflect connection, now reflects only appetite. And once again, lust slides in as if it's natural. But its constant presence turns the world into a hunting ground and people into targets. Infidelity rarely happens out of nowhere. It starts with unchecked thoughts, small choices, subtle compromises, fed by a culture that treats betrayal as just another human mistake. But behind it, lust whispers, "You deserve more." When desire outweighs commitment, destruction follows. Homes break, children feel it, trust disappears. What felt like freedom turns into guilt and regret. Pornography makes it all worse. It feeds fantasies that no real person can live up to. It reshapes expectations and kills intimacy. The other becomes an object, not a soul. Psychology Today reports that regular porn use is linked to lower relationship satisfaction, increased loneliness, and symptoms of depression. It also trains the brain to crave instant, shallow pleasure. You don't learn to love, you learn to consume. This collapse of will doesn't happen overnight. It comes as a habit, small indulgences that over time erode your ability to choose differently. Lust doesn't just want your attention, it wants your mind. And when it wins, what's lost is your very freedom to be yourself. If lust is a force that can destroy, it's also a force that can be transformed. Desire doesn't need to be erased, it needs direction. This is what Napoleon Hill called sexual transmutation. In Think and Grow Rich, Hill wrote that the most successful people redirect their sexual energy into creativity, business, leadership, and legacy. The same fire that seduces can also ignite purpose. Sexual energy is one of the most powerful fuels in the human experience. When guided consciously, it becomes fuel for focus, art, strength, even spiritual depth. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi described the flow state when you're so immersed in something meaningful that time disappears. The pleasure becomes deep, not fleeting. Writing, running, painting, solving problems, these can all be forms of sublimation. The key is to point that drive towards something that builds you. You don't need to repress your desire. You need to elevate it. Desire without direction is chaos. But desire with purpose is creation. And when you start creating, something inside you wakes up, a force that lust once tried to use against you, now working in your favor. Self-control isn't a prison, it's the doorway to real freedom. A man who controls his impulses isn't limiting himself, he's refusing to be controlled by them. Psychologist Walter Mischel's famous marshmallow test showed that children who could delay gratification were more successful later in life. Self-control isn't just helpful, it's a superpower. The modern world constantly pushes instant pleasure. Scroll, click, watch, buy. Saying no has become an act of rebellion, but it's in that no where real power begins. If you can delay the temporary for the sake of something lasting, you build discipline, clarity, and strength. And that strength doesn't come from the outside. It rises from within. Every time you overcome yourself, you get closer to who you really are. Not a slave to impulse, but a mind in control, a soul awake. Mastering your desires is the foundation for everything that matters. The world can be chaotic, but the one who rules himself never gets lost. And that brings us back to the original question, why do strong men fall? Because they lack the strength that matters most, the strength to govern themselves. At the beginning I asked, why do strong men fall? Now maybe you see it, because strength isn't muscles, fame, or intelligence. Real strength is self-mastery. Without it, everything built on the outside eventually crumbles. Lust looks like pleasure, but it hides a deeper purpose, to weaken you from the inside. It doesn't steal all at once. It chips away at who you are until you forget what freedom feels like. This isn't just about sex, it's about freedom. It's about choosing the harder path because it's the truer one, about building instead of consuming, loving instead of using. You won't win every day, but every time you say no to impulse and yes to purpose, you take back ground. To master yourself is the hardest revolution, but it's the only one that really matters. If this message spoke to you, leave a comment below. Let's walk this road together, because no warrior fights alone.